Not all donator needs to give you money. They can give you time, but that only works if you can measure it. If I measure that, that's my in-kind donation that I can use to match other types of funding.
Let's jump right into it. I want to kick things off with quite a direct question. How do you measure your impact assessment at your nonprofit? And what do you specifically measure? Ilias, kick it off.
I'm sorry, I'm going to start with the worst metric ever. But I'll start with that though, because that's also like how we measure our impact, is the good feeling when people come to you and share with you their own stories of how you impacted their lives, whether it's a startup who got clients, someone who found a job, a scientist who was able to launch their own startup after attending one of our activities. And few people actually send us a message telling us like, thank you so much for that, because it allowed me to go to this activity through our calendar and I got this opportunity. I know this is the worst, and I'm sure like Denise, that's not what you want to hear. So I'm sorry to start with that, but I think this is the most important part for us as a human, that connection with our users or our constituents who are grateful for the work we do. That's kind of like warm and fuzzy feeling that you have in your stomach when you hear that comment is what keeps us going.
You mean those touchy-feely things are important, Ilias?
Absolutely. But I'll talk about data, and I'll talk about how we measure things as well, because that's also like you want to wake up in the morning knowing that you have a mission and you're happy about the mission and the impact that you have. And that's the interconnectedness between humans and how people come back to you, telling you what you did, good or bad. Now, that being said, we're in the middle, literally, of our end of year reporting for the variety of partners. And we're lucky to have some amazing people who are tracking some of the data. So on our end, regarding activities that we run, whether it's open innovation or collaborative innovation activities where we bring startups to collaborate with partners, some of the tracking we do is obviously around the number of startups that are in touch and that we work with directly with the partner. That's one way, but also through distribution and the growth of our community itself. So those are like easy metrics, like how many people actually attended, what is the percentage of people who registered versus the people who actually attended. We also share a calendar and what we call a startup kit about the startup resources and opportunities that there are in the ecosystem, and we measure how much it's distributed. Same goes with the newsletter, how many people are subscribed, how many people open it, how many people click, are we doing better from previously or not? So there are a lot of data points that we are tracking where it allows us to see, are we still aligned with our mission? Does it actually keep that kind of recipe that we know we have that is leading that? But also like the base of it is how many collaborative projects happen and what do they lead to? Do they lead to just like blah, 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 and we just talk and we enjoy our time together? Or do they actually lead to tangible projects between the startups and the companies? And for that, how we track that, it's through feedback reports. We send surveys, we get the reports from the companies, etc.
That's a lot of really great metrics. And thank you so much for diving into so much depth, because I like how you touched on both the inner team metrics, but also the external pieces that are touching on partners and the different stakeholders that are impacted. So Valentin, do you see some alignment between the two of you and what both of you are tracking, or do you feel that you track different things from what Ilias is tracking?
The advantage is we both nonprofits, so there's definitely commonalities there. There's a lot of impact assessment that you need to do to measure the impact of a project. But I think it's not impressive if you have a lot of impact in a community, but you burn a ton of resources in order to get there. It's fairly impressive if you can have significant impact with little amount of resources, because that's where, as a nonprofit, you can kind of scale up. And I will just go through kind of a series of examples. So one thing that we do is everybody log their hours on the calendar, not a special calendar, just good old Google Calendar or whatever they have. And we have a system that automatically tracks every hour. And that also includes volunteers. One of the often miscalculated or just not accounted for measure of impact for all organizations is how many hours are made by your volunteer. Nonprofits will often depend on the pool of volunteers, but they have no idea in practice how many hours are done. If your activities are a physical activity, you need to go in a kitchen and you need to put food on the tray for 5 hours, you can measure that. That's pretty easy. But if people work remote, it's really hard to measure how much time people put in. In our case, I can pretty easily pull a report pretty much in real time, actually, of how many hours all the volunteers are pulling, because when we apply for grants and different programs, we can actually say, hey, this is in-kind donations that we can measure. So this is a very simple nugget that a lot of nonprofits are like, oh, wait, it's true. If I measure that, that's my in-kind donation that I can use to match other types of funding, right? And that I'm not even accounting for, because if you have the equivalent of $100,000 a year of volunteering effort, this means you can get more money out of it because they're contributing in kind. Not all donator needs to give you money. They can give you time, but that only works if you can measure it. So that's one simple thing we do. The other one is we measure also not only how many hours we're putting in, but also what's the mood of the team. And that's actually something that we report on. So there are tools out there like Office Vibe, that is a fantastic startup. It's a little plugin that you add to Slack. We use Slack. It's compatible with all kind of other services. And what it does is every week, it just asks a series of questions to your team out of a pool of 200 questions. And it takes just a few seconds to fill, saying, hey, do you feel that your work is valued? Do you feel that you have clear enough instructions? Do you feel that you have good feedback? Do you know who you report to? Do you get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And just ask a few questions every week. But it gives a general pool of, in terms of efficiency, how's your team going? I work with a lot of nonprofits in terms of various digital literacy challenges that they have. And I see a lot of team burning out because they're so used to a physical environment that when they all work remote, it's really easy to lose bits and pieces here and there. And a little tool like Office Vibe will literally do the effort of an HR person for you automatically. And it will say, hey, this is how your team is doing across the year, for example. And again, it's really tempting when we talk about data and measuring impact to measure the impact that we have on the community. But you also have to measure the cost, the human cost. In terms of your team, how's the team at the end of the year? Because if you achieve an amazing impact for the last year, but half of your team is burned out and moved to other projects, as an organization, you did not succeed. That's a massive red flag. So when you make those reporting, you have as much reporting to do for people who are giving money to your organization, because of course they want to know where it's going, but you also need to set in place all those little mechanisms for monitoring. Hey, how's my team going? How many hours are they working? Does that produce the result that we want? And this deals with efficiency, not just results.